Why do skeptics temporarily remove themselves from the lives of intuitive empaths, and how can we bring them back in? Hi, my name is Leah Chantel. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm talking about why skeptical people will temporarily remove themselves from the lives of intuitive empaths and how we can bring them back in most situations. And as I describe the different scenarios to you, you'll discover that there may be a few where they don't come back and they shouldn't come back permanently. Having said that, in a lot of cases when skeptical people are disappearing for a while, it doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship with them is over. And if you think about it, it depends on the period of time too, because sometimes they'll disappear for a few days or even a little over a week or longer. I mean, you may even have some friendships where you don't hear from people for a long time, like 6 months or years, and then you hear back again. It depends how close they are to you. If they're going to be a regular presence in your life, they should be in touch with you more frequently than that. Having said that, here are the different scenarios on why they disappear and what you can do about it. So the first scenario, the reason why skeptics sometimes disappear for a while from the lives of intuitive empaths, is they just need to recharge their batteries in their own way. So skeptics will do things to recharge that are different from intuitive empaths. And one of the assumptions we can make is that our tools that take care of us will be the same as the tools that take care of the skeptic. And that's just not always the case. Sometimes skeptics really recharge when they go to the bar and drink alcohol, whereas that might seem exhausting to an intuitive empath, right? But when they do those things, it's important to recognize that that's a way that they recharge sometimes. And so we don't want to be critical of it or tell them that they're wrong. Instead, we just want to be patient and hold space and wait for them to come back. Now, I mean, there could be situations where people are alcoholics, and if that's the case, you have to reflect and think about if you want to continue a relationship with a person who is an alcoholic. But most people, who are into that kind of culture, they do it moderately, and you don't want to exaggerate or think that they're alcoholic necessarily when it may not be true. And so it's best to just leave them alone when they're doing their recharging activities, and they may look very different from intuitive empath recharging activities. It can be confusing for us, but just realize that that's what works for them, and it's best to stay out of the way where they're in those moments that they need to relax and unwind with their friends. The second thing that causes skeptics to disappear is that they may have a lot of problems in their life. So the thing about intuitive empathic people, when we have problems, we like to share with our community, we like to collaborate. We are the types of people who want to reach out and share information with others, and we're not in a competitive mindset when it comes to problem solving. True intuitive empathic people really want to reach out and lift up other intuitive empathic people, and that's sometimes the way we assume that everybody does their work and everybody solves their problems because that's how it works for us in our world. However, in the world of skeptics, they have a very different viewpoint. They're definitely very lone ranger. They're trying to do things by themselves. And when they have a lot of problems going on in their life, they may not tell you. And not only that, even if you ask, they still may not want to tell you what's really going on in their lives. And if you keep continuing to pry, they'll just get very annoyed by that, and they'll want you to leave them alone while they'll solve their problems. So you don't want to intrude on skeptical people when they are trying to solve problems in their life. You can just kind of observe and watch what's going on with them, but don't try to push them into sharing anything with you, or don't try to force a solution onto them when they're trying to solve their own problems. They will want to solve them their own way, and they may not be willing to accept help, and it's just irritating for them. So it's best to leave them alone and let them solve their problems themselves. And then here's scenario number 3, why skeptics disappear from their relationships with intuitive empathic people. And that could be that you got into an argument. Now, there are a few different scenarios involved in the argument scenario. So we'll go through them one at a time. So the first scenario, having an argument, could be that they said something triggering. That could be their fault, But in response, as an intuitive empath, instead of remaining calm and trying to reason what's going on or deal with the situation in a rational way, you got very emotional and defensive. So let's say a skeptic says something like, I don't believe what you believe in, and you get very emotional and defensive about it. That's going to cause them to actually lose respect for you. You may think you're standing up for yourself, and some intuitive empathic people who are not very good at their profession will advise you to say, hey, tell a bad boss to go to hell, or tell your partner that they're wrong, or whatever. This is not good advice, and when people confront you about your beliefs, the best thing to do is just to stay calm and say, well, maybe it's not for you. But if you do the opposite and you get very emotional and defensive about your beliefs, that's one scenario that the skeptics can pull away and not really come back because they've lost respect for you. And we'll go into this in a little bit more depth in another point I'm going to talk about later on in the video, but we'll just leave it at that. If you've messed up though, the good things about losing emotional control, if it's happened once in your relationship and you never do it again, usually that's enough to correct the problem. You don't have to be perfect 100% of the time, but I wouldn't allow losing emotional control more than once in a relationship. That's when you're really risking the relationship if you're trying to have a peaceful relationship with a skeptical person. So now we're going to go into scenario number 2 when you had an argument. And this is a little bit better, but could result still in the skeptic pulling away. So let's say you set in some boundaries the right way. Let's say, for example, a skeptic said something particularly offensive and you didn't respond, you were calm, but you just decided to walk out of the room in that moment. That's actually a pretty good way. It's a constructive way to not take the attack personally, but also show that it's not okay for them to say or do anything that attacks your beliefs. It sends a good message. Having said that, if you walk out of the room, the skeptic is going to be mad for a while. They may ignore you back, and they may turn it into a game where they ignore you longer than you ignore them, right? Or something like that. And if that's the case, you just got to be very patient and wait for them to come around in their own time. You don't want to badger them or tell them to come back. You just let them be. And if they're a good person and they really want to have a really healthy relationship with you, they will eventually come back and you will eventually be able to have a conversation. Having said that, if the skeptic was really just looking to take advantage of you, maybe they liked that you were generous and you were willing to pay for meals, or maybe they liked that you were a kind person and they wanted to just keep getting more and more positive feedback from you, but not with any intention to sort of reciprocate or do anything nice for you back, then if they were that type of person, they may not come back even after you stood up for yourself in a constructive way and walked out of the room when they were being particularly offensive. And if that's the situation, then that's a good riddance because they're not the right person for you to be friends with or you to be in a relationship with. Okay, so let's move on to the next scenario. And this is also a scenario where you lose emotional control, but maybe it's a little bit more subtle than the argument scenario I was talking about. Let's say, for example, your skeptic does something you don't like. Let's say they do something like they cook a meal and they put something in your food that you are committed to not eating. Or let's say they do something else. Let's say you're all out in a group of friends and they are kind of acting nice to somebody new in the group and showing that they like that person better than they like you or something like that. And they're being kind of rude. If you lose emotional control in that moment, what will happen is the skeptic will either get very angry with you and you may not be in a relationship anymore, or they may think that, hey, this is sort of a fun button push and I'm going to keep doing it again and again because it gets a reaction out of the intuitive empath. So they'll keep doing whatever offensive behavior is very irritating towards the intuitive empath to see if you will continually get irritated over and over again. And if you do get irritated over and over again, eventually that's going to kill your relationship with the skeptic. And you might think, well, why would I want to be in a relationship with a person like that? And that's a good question, but it's interesting. As an intuitive empath, sometimes we get attached to bad relationships even when these things are going on, and we shouldn't be. But it's true, we do. So the best thing is, if this kind of behavior ever comes up even once, the best thing to do is just ignore it the first time. If it continues and it gets really boisterous and really offensive, then walk out of the room. But don't talk about the behavior directly. Let your actions speak louder than words, and the skeptic will understand. They may take their space for a while too, and that's fine. That's their way of responding. But the really good ones are going to come back after a period of time when they have had their space. And so these are the different scenarios about why skeptics disappear. And these are the productive ways you can respond as an intuitive empath for them to come back if they're meant to come back into your life. We all have conflicts and we all have needs for space, even in healthy relationships. So just because somebody's taking their space, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of the relationship or you should freak out. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But the best thing for you to do is just to stay calm in those moments and let people take their space when they need to. And intuitive empathic people need their space too. They also need their time to solve their problems and to recharge and deal with conflict. And sometimes that just takes a little bit of time alone in order to resolve those issues in our lives. I hope you're all having an amazing week and take care. Bye now.